Here we go. My name is Peter, recovered alcoholic, and grateful to be alive and sober and part of a sacred place called Alcoholics Anonymous. And after that very friendly introduction, I think we'll close with the Lord's Prayer, and I'll stay out of trouble. Grateful to be alive and sober. Thank you, Summer, for inviting me and getting to share for a little while tonight with step two, and we'll see where God takes us. A loving God separated me from alcohol on June 23rd, 1988, and I'm very grateful for this gift of sobriety. I do have a sponsor. His name is Bob Bazan from St. Paul, Minnesota. And I do have a home group. It's called Alcoholics and God. And we meet on Mondays and Thursday nights. And I'm very grateful of where God has taken me thus far. It's been a heck of a ride. Um, I've said this from a million podiums. The longer I'm sober and the older I'm getting, um, I seem to be more grateful for what God has removed and continues to remove from me. Usually the things I thought I needed to be okay, the external things I thought I needed to be okay, namely money, property, and prestige to make me a better man, a better AA member, a better husband, and a better something else. And God has kept those things at a distance, or quite frankly, has just removed them for the greater dependence upon Him rather than stuff. I've seen a lot of cats crash and burn, and I've been tempted many times to seek outside things to make me okay, and then get attached to my feelings, worship my feelings, and look to be comfortable. Need to be comfortable. I'm seeking comfort all the time. God forbid I should be made uncomfortable. And the problem is, what I think I need to be comfortable might be the thing that's going to hurt me. And one thing about the spiritual path I've learned, I'm going to be made uncomfortable. So the question is, how free do I want to be? And the path to freedom is a very narrow road and a very disciplined one. And God has to discipline me to the spiritual life. And it isn't about me removing some of the dead leaves off the tree, but having God remove the whole thing, root and branch. How uncomfortable am I willing to go? How much pain am I willing to endure as God brings me to a place of experiencing the depth of self for successful living? Because if I start to dictate what this journey is going to look like and how comfortable I need to be and how uncomfortable I don't want to be, I'm really not surrendering anything to God. What I am is running my life again. I'm dictating the entire journey. And then what I can fall into is trying to fit in with who I think the majority is, who the popular folks are. If I'm hanging out with knuckleheads, I'll be a knucklehead. And if I'm hanging out with big bookers, I might become dangerous with too much information and not enough transformation. So it's really about surrendering all to God and not playing to a majority or anything like that. Because if I start to do that, as I said, I'm running the show, and eventually my life will be broken into pieces again, and the defects will rear their glaring faces again, and I'm back in that spot, and I have a whole bunch of information. And I'm still lacking this personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism. And I start to tell people what they need to do. So now I start to play God, and I'm wondering how come I can't get out of my own way. So I'm really grateful. I'm so grateful that God has kept me right size for the most part. I'll tell you on the front end, I do none of this perfect. I'm flawed. God might one day, in His infinite wisdom and mercy and power, bring me to a place of becoming an enlightened being. And God may make me a spiritual being. But one thing I'm going to have until I take my last breath, and that is human being, which means I get my own way. I'm an alcoholic. I will cause a traffic jam with no one on the road. That's how I operate sometimes. I'm broken and flawed. But I found tremendous liberation, tremendous freedom, and tremendous power in coming to terms with my own brokenness and the greater need for this power called God, which is kind of gets into step one stuff. Because when I got here in 1988, after 7 treatment centers and literally being a homeless bum on the street, living in the back of a hallway in an abandoned building, and needing to drink, it wasn't a luxury. That was long gone. Um, when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous and the wrinkles got out of my belly after a while, I start to feel like I think I know what I'm doing right now. and coming to terms with the great need for God to run my life. It's crushing the ego, but it's what's needed. Now, on June 23rd, 1988, by then I had tried um, Alcoholics Anonymous drunk. I'll be honest with you. I'd stand in the back in a room, drunk, raise my hand, critique everyone, and walk out. And people would say, "Don't leave. Here's my phone number." And I knew AA didn't work. I knew church didn't work. I knew nothing worked. And I just prayed to die. And on June 23rd, 1988, God surrendered me from that scrap heap and placed me in Alcoholics Anonymous once again after my 7 treatment center. At that point, I was completely out of options. I wasn't sitting in this hallway weeping, thinking I need to go to treatment. I need to go to AA. I need to get a sponsor. I quite frankly had no clue what to do at this point. I just knew I didn't want to die. And God placed me in treatment and placed me in Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I'm out of options, as painful as that feels, sometimes it's a great thing because now I'm open. I'm open to direction. I'm open to suggestions. As long as I think I know what I need to do, I can't hear you. Now, my mind is only going to let in what it agrees with and what it knows. And so when I'm out of options, I'm open to direction and suggestion. What I need to be careful about where I was going before is, I start to feel better in AA and start to look good and sound good. Get the AA phrases down, the lingo down, and the old timers will say, "Hey, you look good, you sound good, you look good, you sound good," and I start to get attached to that. My ego locks right into that about looking good and sounding good and getting the job and having the AA girlfriend, getting a little AA car, and putting $5 in the basket instead of 50 cents. And like I want everyone to see me putting $5 in the basket because I'm working now and I'm self-supporting through my own contributions. And now I've created this image, this alcoholic image. And I become really, really attached to keeping my life manageable. And worse, I think I'm doing it. And I get separated from the first half of the first step, which tells me I'm going to drink no matter what the outside world looks like. That I'm suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. And I hit that wall. I hit that wall a few times and had a few surrenders along the way. That I had to quit playing God, that the only one who can manage my life is God. And I get direction from a sponsor, but God ultimately is it. When I first got sober, I did a lot of what many of us do. You parrot what you hear. That sobriety is my number one priority. And I would say that and mean it, and I still do. But really, what my number one priority today is having conscious contact with God. That's it. And because if I'm having conscious contact with God, I find myself sober another day. If I'm having conscious contact with God, not unconscious contact with God, but conscious contact with God, the isms that accompany this monster that I suffer from also start to slow down and die. And the ego little by slowly gets crushed. It's never gone. It'll never be gone, as far as I know. But it's not talking to me. And little by slowly, I begin to live from the soul, hear from the soul, speak from the soul, rather than this predator called the mind and all the manifestations of self. The self. There's 100 forms of this thing, maybe 1,000 forms. In my case, being from Brooklyn, New York, probably a few million forms of self. And they all dictate to me how I'm supposed to be, where I'm supposed to be, where I'm supposed to go, what I'm supposed to have. And every one of those voices are taking me further and further and further away from God. So I get sober in 1988, and I'm a Catholic. I'm a cradle Catholic, and I had never had a problem with the carpenter. I just never believed he cared for me or listened to me. And as far as the czar of the heavens, it was a little out there. And I get real clear on what I suffer from. And then I get a sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I get clearer of what I suffer from. And I felt even more hopeless than when I walked in here, because what the first 43 pages in doctor's opinion did to me was paint me into a corner and remove any options I thought I may have had with the sponsor. And it was a great thing, experiencing more self dying. I love when I hear folks say, I need to work on myself. I need to find myself. I need to get a self help book. And that's the wrong person I'm trying to help. I need to be rid of self at all costs. Barnes and Nobles has the self help section. When they have a no help to self section, I'll buy a book in there. The last thing I need to do is give self any more ammunition to kill me, you know. Um, and so I'm going to meetings, and obviously because of God, I'm not drinking, and I get a sponsor. We begin this journey through the book. Now, prior to getting a sponsor, I would hear the God word, and it wasn't that I recoil from it. It's just that how do you get it? And what came along with it was a lot of old perceptions and conceptions about God. God should have saved my mom who took her life when I was 14 years old. If God was really interested in me, I'd be a success by now. And if God was really interested in me, I wouldn't feel any pain. So I had some suspicion, even contempt. Never doubted, was never an atheist. And so I had this God issue, if you will, a God problem, like a lot of us do when we come in being agnostic. I never denied the existence of God, but thank God for sponsors, because once I was clear that I'm an alcoholic, and as an alcoholic without a spiritual remedy, I'm doomed to drink. There's no way out of this. I can't talk myself out of it. I can't self help myself out of it. The time and place is going to come where I'm going to drink. And what's really frightening as an alcoholic, my illness will go underground and resurface in other places, in other areas. It's the drink in disguise. It's the sex spree. It's the food spree. It's the money spree. It's the gambling spree. It's the eating spree. It's the all of that. And eventually back to hitting the old default button, which says Jack and Coke or double vodka, whatever you're into. And then I'm back again wondering how I got here. So what my sponsor had me do was some things in chapter to agnostics, and what I at first did was this. My first God didn't feel very God at all. It was a gift of desperation on June 23rd, 1988, in an abandoned building where desperation for a moment screamed louder than the ego. And that got me awake and present, if you will, to call upon this God. It was a gift of desperation. And I've heard enough stories over the years. We all have our moments of desperation. That place doesn't feel like a gift, nor does it sound like one, but it certainly is. And as the author Richard Ross says, at that point, we fall up. I beg God for mercy on that day. And that desperation was a gift. And I get to Alcoholics Anonymous. Now I'm praying to this God, but I can't see him. I can't touch. And I don't think I can hear it yet. But I would go to a meeting and I can see you guys. I can shake your hands. You would give me a hug and you would give me direction. And so at first, because chapter to agnostic tells me my own conception, no matter how inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach. It was a group of drunks, God, for good orderly direction. That worked for me because I knew the old timers were going to be there at home group every Monday and Wednesday night in Brooklyn. They were there. They were there every Monday and Wednesday night. They were there. They were the first ones there and the last to leave. And I would walk in and they'd say, "Kid, sit with us." And they'd start to give me some direction. And then a sponsor to open up the big book and begin this journey through the big book for me. And I learned in chapter to agnostics when it came to step two that it was going to tell me how to find God. I just had to lay aside old ideas. You know, the book is genius because it doesn't tell me my old ideas about God are wrong. They just said lay them aside. If they would have said to people like us, to people like me, what you have is wrong, I probably would have said you're right, but there would have been some pushback on me. But they didn't do that. They just said lay it aside. And they told me where to find God. I was always looking out there, some miracle out there, something to part the seas, looking for God in her, looking for God in money, looking for God in stuff. And the book says this great reality, another word for God, was deep down inside me. God doesn't love me if I change. God has loved me so that I change. When I was on the streets doing what I was doing in that life, God had just as much love for me then as he does as I'm speaking to you right now. God doesn't waver. I waver. The human mind wavers. It's fickle. But God doesn't. It's pristine, perfect, and all, there all the time. It even tells me why I should find God. When I see people solving their problem with the simple reliance upon this powerful God, how could I doubt this God? I would walk into a meeting, and I remember it was called the Three Legacies in Minneapolis. It was a Friday night meeting. Everyone was suited up. There was about 300 people there, and they had the guest speaker. I believe they had two 10-minute speakers as well, talking on one of our sides of the triangle. And all of them from the podium by the coffee pot at some point would say, but for the grace of God, if it wasn't for God, I'd be dead. If it wasn't for God, I love my God. And God, 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 how could I doubt this when I'm seeing it with my own eyes and hearing it with my own ears that there's one power, different conceptions of it, but they're talking about the same power has rescued them. I don't know this God, but in a sense I do because he surrendered me. And all I have to do is practice fidelity to God, and I get to experience his fidelity to me and be faithful to the practice, and I experience the practice in my life. Then I start to continue through the steps. And I remember my sponsor had me do something that wasn't in the big book. It was just a little spiritual homework assignment. He's, why don't you write down your old conception of God? It was that God I was going to hell no matter what. And he says, write down your present conception of God. It was you, group of junks for good holy direction. And then he gave me another assignment. He says, write out how you would like to have a God in your life. What would that God look like? And I got to see something on paper, but the steps are the steps, and they prune the tree. And somewhere in going through the steps, I came upon my God, if you will. And I start to believe in things I couldn't see, to the point where I have complete dependence upon God. So when I look at step two, it says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. I had to be really clear in step one at a gut level. I know some folks say these, the one, two, and three are conclusions of the mind. I respectfully disagree. The last thing my mind I'm gonna do is listen to it. My mind comes to one conclusion: drink. Not has nothing, wants no part of the spiritual path. But deep down in my soul, I knew I was done. I conceded way beyond that to my innermost self that I'm alcoholic and I need something greater than me. There was a moment in that hallway because we live life forward and kind of understand it backwards. And I don't remember the exact language, but it was something like, could it be possible that those people who worked in the treatment centers, those H&I folks from AA who brought the meetings in, and some of those meetings I bounced in and out of, could it be possible that they were right when they said God was the solution? And could it be possible I'm wrong? My track record proves, based on what I was doing, I'm wrecking my life. Is it possible that they were right? Is it possible there's a God out there? Am I even willing to try this? And then I began to pray, if you're out there, please take me from this. I don't want to die. Am I willing to get out of all of this? And for me, step two was quite frankly a pointer out of all of this madness, all of this suffering, and all of this pain and humiliation. Step two was the pointer out. You know, before GPS is in the car, you would usually write down directions from whoever you're going to visit, and you put it on a notepad and pen, and I'd still get lost anyway. And my analogy, if I'm driving around in a really bad neighborhood and it's really dark and I can't find my way out and there's no lights, I'm stuck in the forest, wherever the heck I am, I need to get home, and way up ahead, I see lights. What I do is I drive there. Maybe there's a strip mall, maybe there's somebody around to point me to get back on the expressway. That's how I used to do it. I'm driving around, my life is going nowhere. And someone says there's a way out, and I just follow it. And it's a pointer to a solution. Am I willing to do that? Not if I believe I have more options, not if I believe I can still control my life, not if I believe I can still manage my life. When I'm completely out of options, I start to ask for direction. Is it possible these people are right and I was wrong. So for me, step two was an arrival point. I was going to get to this place where this power called God was going to restore me to sanity or wholeness of mind, truth, living in the solution. Because I can't get drunk on the truth. I always buy the lie, and the truth gets me. For me, being restored to sanity means I was insane somewhere. And I can look at all the crazy things I did in the pursuit of money to get a drink. But currently, how does that meet me? And for me, it looks like this. Anytime I'm trusting and relying upon me to accomplish anything, I'm repeating the old behavior over again. That's a form of insanity. I have no business trusting and relying upon me. What I ought to be doing is seeking God or seeking out a sponsor for direction. Self reliance for me usually comes because I'm afraid God's not listening. The answer's not coming quick enough. I don't believe God's going to fix it. So now I have some self reliance going on because I have some fear going on, which means I have some current agnosticism going on, which means I'm a little unmanageable and I don't know it yet. And it's a vicious cycle. And if that spring gets too tight or that noise in the head gets too loud, what I do when it gets like that, I need to seek relief somewhere, and it's usually a drink. And if it isn't a drink right up front, I'm acting out with food or sex or gambling, just fill in the blank. And eventually I pick up a drink to shut the noise down so I can get still again. So I try to avoid self reliance. I try to avoid anything to do with self and have more God reliance rather than me reliance. Because even though I'm sober, I can get stuck in more, MORE. I need more of this, I need more of that, and it's compulsive and obsessive, and it's really on drinking, except I haven't put alcohol in my body. Came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Right before step three, it says, we were alcohol, could not manage in my own life. Am I clear on that? That no human power could relieve me of my alcoholism? Now, I live in South Florida, and we're loaded up with treatment centers and sober houses and detox. I mean, you throw a rock across the street, you hit 45 treatment centers. I mean, that's what it looks like. And bless their hearts. But what I see a lot of cats crashing and burning is with this, that the human power is going to relieve their alcoholism. It's called boyfriend and girlfriend. She's got 30 days, he's got 40 days, but it's a match made in heaven. It's going to work, and it never does. Or we don't drink and go to CrossFit and get a great body and then find a boyfriend and girlfriend and they crash and burn and they do everything except God. Yeah. No human power can relieve me of my alcoholism. My sponsor one time, my old sponsor asked me a question one time. He set me up great, like sponsors tend to do. He said to me, how much money do you think you need? And I thought about it. And I says, I don't know, $1 million, $5 million. And I kept going up, and he says, no. I said, what's the answer? Just enough money not to need God. That's how much money an alcoholic needs. That's how much property and prestige you need. Just enough not to need God. And I see a lot of folks coming into money real fast in early sobriety, and AA takes a back seat, and so does God. And then you,
Sure. Let me look that up.
okay, using that money to get into detox again. So when it says no human power can relieve my alcoholism, I need to be clear about that now. And it says God could and would if he was sought. The good news is I can tell you God can and has, and I continue to seek him. Step two is, I see it. I see it in my life and I can see it in others. It's very tangible. When you see a new guy come in or a new woman come into a meeting like I was, and they're tore up from the floor up, yeah. And then they kind of get a sponsor and they start making meetings and they start rolling through the steps. And you watch that guy in 90 days or 6 months with his little sponsee sitting down in the corner of the AA hall and taking them through the work. And they're not relapsing anymore, and they have a home group and they're doing service and they've gotten traction, and then his sponsee does the same like my sponsor did with me. How could I deny what I'm seeing? What's interesting is I go through the steps, and by the time I get to step 10, where I was hoping for sanity to be returned in step 2. By the time I get to step 10, it tells me that sanity has been returned. They deliver the package. I've entered the world of the spirit. And this is a place we call recovered from a singly hopeless state of mind and body. The 10-step promises talk about that. So here I am, I'm bouncing around and I'm not sure which end is up, and I'm grasping at straws because I don't want to die anymore.
Thank you for calling Costco. How can I help you?
Okay. And well, I was getting drunk somewhere. What the heck was I? I forgot. I don't. Anyway, and I take to this work, and life starts to change. So where I am currently is, thank the good Lord, in Alcoholics Anonymous. The obsession has been long gone. And the isms, those sprees that I would go on. I remember my first 6 months, I was Looney Tunes. I developed an eating disorder in my first year. I had this binging and purging problem, and it was getting me sick. And it showed up out of nowhere, if you will. And I had to go seek outside help for that and visit another fellowship and go through the steps with that. And there was some other sprees during my first 6 months that I was going on that was not healthy for me. It contradicted the spiritual life. I'm happy to report to you that because of Alcoholics Anonymous and God and me practicing fidelity to God, those things haven't reared their ugly heads in, it seems like, a million years. And the thought of a drink a day at a time, thank you, God, has not crossed this mind of mine at all. And that's called a place of freedom. And sometimes I was one of them, all my sponsors were very, very rigid. The only one who wasn't so rigid was this guy, Don P. out of Colorado, but very, very rigid. And I got into being rigid and sometimes taking inventory of people who weren't rigid. And God forbid you should misquote the big book. Oh my God, emergency group conscious meeting. They misquoted the big book. Oh God, they were supposed to speak on step 3 and they just gave a really good qualification. We can't have them back anymore. And it was like this. And that is not recovery. It's about experiencing the freedom that the book talks about and not have an ego driven recovery where I can quote the book and therefore I've arrived. It's about getting information and having a transformation where I begin to practice love and tolerance towards others and teach and learn and teach and learn. And as my sponsor says, it's pitching and catching, it's reciprocal. I'm speaking right now. I'll go to a meeting tomorrow and someone else will be speaking and I'll be listening. And we need both ends of this, but not to play God or believe I'm God because I'm loaded up with a bunch of information. I got married to the book. I got married to the steps. I got married to the traditions. I got married to all of that. And it worked for a while. And I kept running into me because I wasn't experiencing the freedom God's offering. And that's what this book points me to. It's a menu. I love the mechanics. I do the mechanics. I write inventory at night. I go through the steps once a year. I know the book. I've experienced in the book. But Don once told me the book has to be in the soul to really experience the freedom. And so I'm very grateful for that. It's pretty cool too, because as I said, I do none of this perfect. Being a flawed person, God's mercy allows me to still experience freedom in Alcoholics Anonymous. There's a way I like to do things, and there's a way I'll respectfully disagree with. I will tell you that. I don't like to wait a year. People say wait a year before you get into the steps. I think we're killing people with that one. I remember a guy telling me one time I was almost 6 months to the day sober. He says to me, "Where are you with God in the 12 steps?" I says, "When do you start the steps?" He says, "When you stop throwing up, you're late." I get that. I get that. I'm bleeding to death. I don't have time to look at it continue to bleed. I need to stitch it up and start to heal. So the sooner the better. And have a sponsor who's gone through the steps, so I can begin to have this awakening and conscious contact with God. That's what these men gave to me, because I am going to drink unless I get that. If I'm a real alcoholic, the guy on page 21, I'm doomed to drink. So I need God to get in front of that for me, because no human power is going to solve that or relieve me of it. Um, Last thing I'll say is I don't even seek relief anymore. That's what I did at the beginning. Just relief for a few hours, to get out of my own way for a few hours. And what the book has done is give me a whole lot of freedom. About once a week, I take my car to the car wash, or I do it myself. But when I go to the car wash, they kind of wave you in, and they tell you, go to the left, go to the right, and then you hear click. The car gets traction, and they say, put the car in neutral and let go. I don't have to do anything. And this thing takes my car through the car wash, and it comes out looking fabulous. Sometimes I believe it even runs better after the car wash. And for me, it's like that in Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a sponsor who's going to direct me what to do. And at some point, I get traction, and it's let go, really let go, not be apathetic, not care, not bury my head in the sand, but let go and let God do what God's going to do, and continue to remove the plaque from my soul, because it's there. My mind and ego says there's none left, until I go through the steps again. I say, I got a little left. So it's this constant 4 through 9 process, and I'm just so grateful to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, a member of good standing, and that's all I got, guys. Thanks for listening. Peace.
Thank you so